I did selection twice. All right. The second time I did it, I did a lot of cycling on a station on my bike on a trainer, reading my Air Force CGSC material. I did a lot more low impact compared to what I'd done previously when I was coming out of the Ranger Regiment.
Hey team, welcome back to Mops and Mo's podcast. Happy to have you. Happy to have you back for episode number.
We don't have episode numbers anymore. You have no idea what it
No
is. It's
clue. It's a
roughly
lot.
125. It's in that ballpark.
We hit 200,000 downloads though. That's kind of cool.
We did. It's exciting.
And for people that were wondering, my water is back on. Was that last week? That was last week. My water broke.
In fairness, I think only one person expressed that they cared about whether
Well, that
your
one
water came back.
person is lovely. Shout out to them. For people that didn't hear last week, they're digging fiber optic trenches in my neighborhood and they hit a water main. And the banter on the Facebook group was that the water company didn't mark the line in the right place, or maybe nobody knows whose fault it is, but needless to say, we were without water for a week. No,
Neighborhood utility
that's not
drama.
true. Why did I say a week? A couple days.
And weren't you gone for most of the days? It was.
Yeah, I went to the mountains. It was fine.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I didn't boil tap water when I got back. I just kind of went for it. And I'm not dead, and my daughter's not dead. So
Congrats.
yeah, but
That brings us to an important subject for future plans for you, which is
my shitty internet.
Yeah, they broke the water main because they were installing fiber optic cable, which means soon you should be able to get fiber optic internet.
Correct. And I signed up for 250 Mbps's.
Sure.
Which is what I have now, but it was like $30 cheaper. But I got an email the other day that they've upgraded me for no charge to 500.
As of when?
Well, the internet's not done. Like they're still doing the stuff. So
yeah,
it's
you're gonna
done.
need you're gonna need some more Mbps's.
For one person, 500 megabops seems like a lot.
I don't know.
Truthfully,
I don't know how many megabytes
clue.
per second you're getting.
I have no idea.
I can't really put the numbers in context. I run speed test. My stuff's fast. All I know is, and we're letting listeners behind the curtain of the podcast process here for a second, but Drew is the one with the Zoom account. And I don't know if Drew's dumb or Zoom is lying, but Drew claims that Zoom is like recording each of the tracks like locally at that person's machine.
That's what it says.
It's clearly not, because whenever anything's wrong with your internet, it messes up all of the tracks. So I will apologize in advance because this episode was affected by it a little bit. Not real bad. But if you're paying really, really close attention, you might catch a couple edit points in the episode where like 5 seconds worth of audio was lost. And we knew something was going on because Drew would freeze during the podcast recording, but like we're smooth operators, so we just played it off and everything was fine. And I just kept the conversation going. Come to find out, I'm editing the podcast like a week later, and whenever Drew was frozen, no matter who was speaking, that audio is gone. So Drew needs to get better internet.
For people that don't know, I live in rural North Carolina, so forgive me.
You should fix that as well. That's
absolutely not. So anyway, speaking of conversations, this week we're talking to
highly qualified guest we got here. We have Lieutenant General Steve Gilland. He commissioned as an Army officer after graduating from West Point in 1990 and has been on active duty ever since. As an infantry officer, he served in a variety of tactical assignments in basically every kind of infantry organization: air assault, armor, mechanized, ranger, special operations. He has served in the 24th Infantry Division, the 2nd Infantry Division, the 75th Ranger Regiment, and the United States Army Special Operations Command, doing cool guy stuff. Also the 1st Cavalry Division and the 101st Airborne Division and the 2nd Infantry Division. And then at the corps level, 3rd Armored Corps. And as you can tell, he is currently the Superintendent of the United States Military Academy and previously was the Commandant of the United States Military Academy. Lieutenant General Gilland has commanded at every level up to division and participated in numerous operational deployments to the Middle East, Africa, and Afghanistan. Prior to assuming duties as West Point's 61st superintendent, he served as the deputy commanding general for maneuver of 3rd Armored Corps at then Fort Hood, now Fort Cavazos. General Gilland holds a master's degree in military operational art and science from the Air Force Command and Staff College. And as you would expect from a career like that, he has a very long list of awards. I'm going to skip past those to skill badges. Uh, Combat Infantryman's Badge, Expert Infantryman's Badge, Ranger Tab, Master Parachutist Badge, Air Assault Badge, and then notably less common than the rest, Military Freefall Jump Master Badge. Pretty cool stuff. General Gilland has been happily married to his West Point classmate Betsy for more than 33 years, and Team Gilland are the proud parents of 3 children.
And you didn't mention we had a 4th guest on this episode, which was Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Yeah, we had Dwight Eisenhower on the pod as well. You won't hear him speak because he spent it mostly looming over General Gilland's shoulder in the form of a giant portrait.
And also he's dead.
People won't know this. Drew probably won't know this. General Gilland lives in Quarters 100, historical building on West Point's campus. As I understand it, the first floor of the house is also a museum. Like it has like artifacts and stuff in it. It's preserved, and there's like staff that takes care of some of those things. I think he gets some control over the second floor where his family like lives. But the first floor is like very formal, and that's where Ike hangs out.
Yeah. So wide-ranging discussion with a very senior leader at a very cool school. If anybody here has seen Harry Potter, you will of course recognize the scenery. Hogwarts and West Point are in fact the same place. So yeah, as a non-West Point alum, it's always fun to engage with West Point people. It seems that we've become the de facto podcast for that institution.
Sorry about that.
We've interviewed just about everyone on staff, and this week culminates with the boss man himself. So enjoy.
You guys just had Elon Musk out there, and the reason I'm curious about it has nothing to do with the politics of it or even the topic of it. I'm curious kind of from an academic freedom standpoint, really. When it was announced that he was coming, it attracted a ton of flack online. And if it had been a civilian university doing it, you probably would have seen protests, shout downs, whatever, things like that. And it strikes me as a little bit ironic that with like the discipline and rigidity of the military, that service academies might be a last bastion for real academic freedom where you can have serious conversations with people even if you disagree with them.
Absolutely. And we should expose our cadets to everything. There's different perspectives that reside out there, and whether you agree with it or not, you got to present the different aspects. And so when you think about Elon Musk, I mean, let's face it, world leader, and when we think about emerging technology, doesn't mean that people have to agree or disagree with him, but we do believe that we've got to present all aspects and arguments to our cadets. And really the fundamental aspect of it is we talk about developing, critical thinkers, leaders of character who are critical thinkers. In order to be a critical thinker, you've got to be able to analyze all different perspectives is what it comes down to. And quite honestly, if we put, graduates, newly commissioned second lieutenants out into the Army, and you name it, and they said, well, we couldn't talk about that at West Point. Like, I mean, that's not really putting your best forward, let's face it.
I mean, it takes me back because when I was a cadet, Henry Kissinger came and spoke to us, and there are a lot of people that disagree with or disagreed with Henry Kissinger on a lot of things. But like you have to expose yourself to ideas you don't already agree with if you want to like grow in any meaningful way. I just thought it was really interesting. It was cool
Absolutely.
that happened like a week before we were chatting with you. That's all.
Yeah.
Do you get flack? And I'm thinking, granted, I think everyone who listens to this knows I didn't go to West Point. Alex went to West Point. You guys are buddies. I'm not. I get it. But I'm thinking back to not too long ago. I think it was the dean of Harvard and 2 others that sort of got fried for some things. And I'm curious at West Point, and maybe this is military academies in general, Have you guys noticed the same sort of, I don't know, maybe friction is the right word in terms of the student body and just kind of the way that youths are these days as it pertains to that kind of freedom of speech and thought, or less so in the academy environment?
I think in this environment, you got to come back to the common denominator, which is the Constitution. So we think about our cadets who, swear an oath to the Constitution 3 different times while they're here. And you don't see that anywhere else, only at the service academies. And so even though people have different views here, respectively pro or anti something, I mean, the expectation, I go back to this, develop leaders of character who are critical thinkers. Like we shouldn't coddle our cadets. We shouldn't shy away from the difficult conversations. And those difficult conversations reside in all different areas and domains. Thus, when last October when we talked about the Israel and Gaza, I mean, we've got a number of students, from international students and with certain beliefs, but the key to it is, hey, we've got to have a discussion that is civil in nature and understand different perspectives.
Every time something significant happens in the world, I miss being a cadet in the social department.
It's Hogwarts. Every time we have West Point conversations, I just think about Hogwarts.
That's an accurate description.
That's what everyone says. Oh man, I miss being back there.
Drew and I were talking about it a little bit, I think yesterday before we did this recording and everything. And we were talking about how at service academies, you theoretically have less ability to express yourself, kind of.
Yeah.
And a talking point I've kept bringing up that I don't hear other people bring up so much that I think is cool is that you don't get to dress a certain way. You don't get to color your hair a certain way. You don't get to do crazy piercings and things like that. That's what that creates, is that you have to actually have an identity and a personality, not just put one on superficially. And I thought that was kind of cool. You learn much more about who you are and like how to be an individual and have an identity when you don't get to do it just through clothes or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good description. Yeah. I mean, you got to define who you are. And how I would couch that is that, your actions, your inactions, your behaviors, your attitudes, your beliefs, your language, that defines who you are, which is your character.
I was going to start bringing this because we're talking about some like really high level, really interesting stuff. But at the end of the day, this is a little bit of a Knuckle Dragon fitness podcast. And I want to bring
cerebral meatheads.
Yeah, nerdy.
I like that.
Podcast, whatever you want to call it. And I do want to bring the conversation around to how West Point approaches fitness, how West Point approaches human performance, wellness, all of these things. And as an opener to that kind of conversation, and I used to be good friends with your previous aide, or I am good friends with someone who was your previous aide, and I found out that you got a 600 on your ACFT. And I'm curious, after over 3 decades on active duty, what do you attribute your ability to perform at that level to?
Consistency. Trying to keep up with Sean in particular is what drove me on that particular score. No, I think consistency matters. I mean, discipline matters, routine. Now, what you can fall into though is some routines create bad habits, and you find out, particularly after injury or something of that nature, that it's a hell of a lot harder to bounce back, and you got to start over again. And actually, the benefit of that is starting over the right way. And going about it through, all the aspects of performance, particularly physical performance, that you both highlight in this podcast specifically.
What do you think is, I mean, in your leadership position, what role does fitness play in that? I guess the question there is sort of twofold. One, setting the example, but then two, developing young leaders. What role do you see fitness playing in that piece of it?
I think, well, one is being a role model, setting the example. It matters, but the culture of fitness here is really positive. Here you get exposed to it. You are not just exposed though; you're immersed in it So when we think of our Department of Physical Education and, Colonel Nick Gist, the Master of the Sword, who you had on quite a while ago.
Best title, I think, in the world.
Absolutely. There's no
Best
doubt
job
about it.
title. It's a good
Yeah,
title.
it is. But the fact that we really start out in, as some would relate to the crawl, walk, run approach, exposing, the cadets to the basics. Now, some of our cadets have been physically active at very high performing levels for a good portion of their lives. Doesn't necessarily mean it was the right way. Thus, we start with, really the fundamentals of fitness. I think the Master of Sword walks you through all that, and then you have to you have to perform here, through not only the ACFT, we have our indoor obstacle course testing, but a core set of courses that every cadet's got to go to. So how does that come back to me? Well, you know what? I mean, I've got to be out there demonstrating what right looks like. It starts with me. And if I'm going to ask them to own it, I got to own it also. So I'm out. We do Soups PT every couple times a month, alternating off with the comm. I'll go get in the gym and I'm, doing the IOCT, go down, do the ACFT with cadets or with the staff and faculty, depending, and not shying away from it.
Have you, and maybe this is more just the academy at large, but have you guys noticed a change in the incoming student body as we've seen just sort of culturally a change away from more of a physically cultured youth, more, discussions around obesity and all that sort of stuff would be included in that. But has that changed the student body, so to speak?
I wouldn't say as a whole for the student body that has changed, because remember, to get here, there's a nomination process, there's a physical component of your whole candidate score, that's called. So you have to do push-ups, you have to do sit-ups, you have to do a 1 mile run, you have to throw a basketball from your knees. I mean, and what you find out is that, more and more of a small population have not run 2 miles. And it's not that they couldn't, it was just they hadn't done it because it wasn't required of them in any way, shape, or form, whether it was in high school or on whatever team that they participated in. If they did, it just wasn't required, so they hadn't done it.
I'm curious about a few different things. And these are all things that I look back on and wonder why they were the way they were when I was there and things like that. One that I'm definitely curious about, during the academic year, there is the intramural sports requirement if you're not on a core squad team, but there's not like a daily PT requirement other than whatever you do yourself. And I'm curious because that always surprises them. Like if you talk to an ROTC program, they have some daily or a couple days a week PT requirements and things like that. I'm curious what the decision making process is on why there isn't some kind of, and I know some companies do things like that and they're left the opportunity to do so. I'm just wondering what the logic is there. I'm not saying they should do it, but there's enough requirements already.
Right. Well, remember, Alex, your class was the last hard class. Okay.
I thought it was a class before Alex that was the last hard class.
Well, on this show anyway, it's Alex's last class, okay? Or his class was the last one.
Yeah, that's fair.
No, I think that, well, one, individual accountability. It starts with each individual. You got to own it. And through the testing process, if your physical fitness isn't at a minimum level, it's going to come out pretty quickly. Okay. So when we think about, why isn't there a more structured process? Well, because, hey, each of our cadets need to own their fitness. Now, I will tell you, compared to when I was a cadet, 35 plus years ago, and we talk about this all the time, the cadets today, like I said, the culture of fitness is so much better than what it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, certainly 35 years ago. I mean, there's cadets that are running right now. They chose to run. at 5:30 in the morning, they're out and about till after 2200 at night. They're out and about, and you see them. They're in the gym, and I will tell you from my perspective, it's an incredibly positive trend that has occurred over a number of years that I think has resulted from one, the instruction here, not only, the fundamentals of fitness and hey, why physical fitness matters in life, but also this, hey, the Army is a team contact sport. That's my perspective. The Army is a team contact sport. You've got to be able to get in there and mix it up. Otherwise, the Army can be really challenging if you don't look at it that way.
This is not a question or anything. I was just hyped on it when I was back there for a football game last year. Just the nature of having like little gym lockers around the barracks. I think walking by, I saw 2 different lifting competitions going on just organically in the evening.
Yeah.
Probably a cumulative like 100 people involved between the two of them.
Do people run past your house this late hoping that you'll like give them a coin or something? I mean, what's the...
No, it's just, I just happened to, my house happens to be on like one of the main thoroughfares for heading out for a run or coming back. I usually make a comment like, pick up the pace, finish strong.
This guy on the porch in a rocking chair.
Not a rocking chair, but close.
I got a 600. That's awesome.
You mentioned being up and about at 5:30 and still out and about at 2200. That brings me to a slightly tough topic for West Point. I know when I was there, it was like well acknowledged that kind of everyone was a little bit sleep deprived. And that was part of the nature of the beast is you're trying to manage a bunch of stressors and you're learning how to do that because you're going to do that in the future. How does the leadership at West Point think about the sleep component of health, wellness, fitness, development, and things like that?
I'll tell you from personal experience, it's a huge component and I know it. I know it not only from this type of environment, but in the deployed environment. And I've got a few deployments in my background, and as a result, being sleep deprived, it impacts decision making. It impacts performance, holistic, your whole body performance on a daily basis if you're not consistently getting the rest that you need. And I know that. Now, here at West Point, and believe me, I'm not one of these people that live off of 4 hours of sleep a night. I've had to live off of 4 and less hours of sleep a night for periods of time. And you know what? I wasn't a better person for it. There's no doubt about that. I wasn't. We promote sleep. It comes back to, again, individual accountability. Like you gotta choose when you're sleeping. I think that we have created an environment where in the team overall is creating the environment where we talk about the importance of sleep and why you gotta make sure that you've got that appropriate rest so that you can think more clearly, you can perform at a higher level, and quite honestly, to be the best person that you can be.
Has the we've asked this question to a couple of folks, I guess now we can say over the years because we've been doing this for a couple of years. But has the emergence of a more holistic view on human performance in the Army changed or maybe forced to change in the academy from the perspective of like, okay, now these leaders are going into these positions where they'll be in charge of soldiers who are able to access resources that allow them to, explore things like mental health, explore things like sleep, so has that changed some of the culture for you guys and or some of the curriculum, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say even before the Army, though, we had some of that already going on here from a programmatic perspective. I think about our Center for Enhanced Performance, getting in there with people, it's years ago it was the pod, so I go sit in the pod, I relax, I'm controlling anxiety, I'm learning some of my coping skills, whether it's through breathing, I'm able to, envision what I'm supposed to be doing. So, from the pod, we've gone to virtual reality. You put the goggles on, and if I have trouble stepping off of the high dive, the platform, well, now I can get virtual reps in. And then when I get up there on the platform, it's not as difficult. I've done this before in my mind, at least. I've done this, and how do I can step off and execute the task. So, and then we've got also, through our behavioral wellness, we've got MFLCs, military and family life counselors. We've got one that's embedded in each regiment, which a regiment is about 1,100 cadets. We've got our Center for Professional Development, which is, counselors, of which it's all non-attributable. You can go in. So whether it's coping skills, life matters, I haven't dealt with some sort of situation before. We've got varying levels of support that, either a cadet, or, heck, even I could be referred to, or I choose to go and say, hey, this is what I got going on. And if that's not the right place, they know the places to direct you to get you to the right resources. Heck, I wish I'd have known about the CPD when I was a cadet. I might have been a better cadet, quite honestly, but I didn't know about it. We do a much better job of informing and exposing our cadets to the different resources also.
So this is a really specific question that I'm just a little bit curious about, because you mentioned the virtual reality as a way to prep for the diving board scenario. And for those not familiar, a legitimate graduation requirement is to step off a 10-meter board.
Do people do like cannonballs and stuff, or do you just have to are you not allowed to?
Not a cannonball. There's a deliberate process and form that you have to assume.
Mm-hmm. So no belly flops.
No.
Oh man.
It's the commands are, step up, hook up. So you place your hand over your face, elbows are in, secure your elbow that's over your face, and then you step off and you got to bring your feet together. Injury prevention.
So my curiosity on that comes from, does anyone ever not graduate based on that alone? Or there's a supportive framework in place to help people get through that if it's a hurdle for them. But I hear it come up enough that it makes me wonder how often that specific event becomes the hurdle between somebody and graduation.
Well, it's not. And yes, people have not graduated because of not passing swimming, swimming being the requirement.
Okay. So it's part of the grade on that course, and that's
correct. But in order to receive as part of that tested block, all right, which is you got to enter the water from the high dive, go through some underwater obstacles, more or less like hoops and that. And this is all in your OCPs or your ACUs. Then you got to do your swimming. Then you got to tread water, inflate take your pants off, inflate them, and tread water. But in order to do that, you got to get in the water. That's the first step of it. And there's a set of points that's associated with that overall task.
Is it just come up so often? Because I hear the CEP involvement in getting people over that hurdle. Is it just that's just like a uniquely stressful, fearful event for people? I come at this from a weird place. I was not a very good swimmer.
Are you saying a lot of people aren't jumping off the diving board and they're failing West Point?
No, they're not. No. What we're saying is that they fail swimming.
Right. Fail swimming. Yeah.
Right. Okay. A component of passing swimming is that you gotta go step off the high dive,
right,
enter the water, and perform other tasks.
Okay? I love that, because I went to Chapel Hill and I'm trying to figure if one day they just decided that everybody had to pass swimming to graduate, that school would probably collapse. Yeah. So it's good to hear you guys are hanging on.
It's a graduation requirement it's a graduation requirement to pass the indoor obstacle course test, either, your junior or senior year also. We have graduation requirements that are different than, say, UNC, because the American public expects more from us, quite honestly.
That's
And
fair. That's fair.
you know what I mean?
We probably win in football, though, I have to think. I mean, maybe not this year, but
I'm not so sure about that.
we'll see. We'll see.
I've had a lot of interaction recently with Air Force Academy people, and it's almost football season, so I'm getting prepared for the smack talking.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Ask the question you were going to ask about the Air Force Academy cadets.
Oh, I don't know if there's a question there. I was discussing with Drew before recording whether to bring up this topic on here. In my current day job role, have a massive influx of very new Air Force Academy graduates who have come through, and they do physical training with my team.
Mhm.
60 or 70 of them have recent arrivals. And I'm admittedly, and this may come from a place of bias and rivalry and things like that, but it seems to me like these Air Force Academy recent graduates are a lot less physically fit than I would expect West Point recent graduates to be. And I know they have their own mission they're training for, and it might be slightly less physical than ours, but they still do have like a cadet physical program and things like that. Honestly, like I said, I don't know if there's a question associated with it. I just see the product of that academy coming into my space, and it's not where I would hope it to be. And I will do a shout out. I don't know if I want to put them on blast and do it by name, but there are a couple West Point cadets who have made their way to the Space Force who are also there, recent West Point graduates who have made their way to the Space Force, cross commissioned and things like that. And one of them did dominate physically all of the Air Force recent graduates. So that was pretty cool to see.
Yeah, I would expect nothing less though when it comes down to it. No, Drew, I think when you ask that question of Alex and or your statement of hey, just ask. I think it comes back to culture though, and understanding what is expected in the Army versus other services, and the culture of physical fitness in the Army. And and believe me, I mean, I'm not saying that the other services don't have as much emphasis on it, but I mean, I go back to it's a team contact sport, the Army is, and you gotta be able to be physical, regardless of your branch. I mean, you're required to road march, you're required to do these different things. I mean, the ACFT, for instance, which by the way, I think is a heck of a lot better than the APFT, because if you just go do something that equates to trying to improve your ACFT score, you're doing more than what you were doing with the APFT. And so I think it's a good thing.
Have you, I guess on the topic of culture, have you found that I guess we could call this sort of the emerging landscape insofar as modern warfare is concerned, what we're seeing in Ukraine, Russia, all of these things, is that changing the optic in terms of what you're prepping cadets for, or does it stay the same historically speaking?
No, I think it evolves. Absolutely. I mean, we got to look at what the demands are. Last week, General Cavalry, who is the Supreme Allied Commander Europe and the U.S. European Command Commander, was here and talked. And I mean, you talk about think about the Ukraine Russia theater of operation, of which they are not just hours and days, but weeks and months in trench lines being shelled, which is reminiscent of 100+ years ago in World War I. But at the same time, it's the 21st century technology of you got a drone that might show up in your trench, okay, and it's an armed drone. Or I mean, when we think about really the evolution of warfare, and I think as we look at not only today but into the future, it's really, I mean, there's a convergence of what we've seen in the past and what we believe will be the future, and it's a really complex battlefield. Thus, our leaders have got to be able to think through it. They've also got to be able to, from an emotional perspective, be able to manage, their respective emotions, anxieties, and so forth, in order to lead their formations. One of the things that he brought up again is, and how do you prepare yourself for spending weeks and months in a trench line in sub-freezing weather, rain, of course, all of the factors that come with that, rodents, no chow, no sleep, shelling every day. Like, that's hard to simulate, but that's the human endeavor of combat. And it's something that we haven't seen in decades, but we're seeing it right now. And the potential is that you see it in the future. I don't think that the future is all it's not sterile. I don't think it's, a bunch of unmanned vehicles, whether it's air, ground, or sea. The human has still got to be out there to seize terrain. Formations are going to have to maneuver. They're going to have to, leverage suppressive fires. Suppressive fires isn't always artillery. It could be other aspects of warfare that you're suppressing with in order to achieve the objective.
This is more out of curiosity and something Alex and I have talked about, and I'm just curious, with all of your years of experience at tons of different units, doing tons of different missions. I mean, we sort of, if I could be so bold as to say, we were sort of expecting warfare to look like Call of Duty, I think, with the war on terror and kind of the direction everyone assumed things were going. And then all of a sudden, we're back in World War I, with some exceptions. You mentioned drones and modern day technology. I'm curious, your own, I guess, personal take on what that might look like, your own opinions on that, maybe tactically from a leadership standpoint, because of everything you've seen and done. Like, what do you make of all of this? It seems shocking.
Yeah. So when in 2016, I was in Iraq as part of the combined joint task force that was supporting the Iraqis in their fight against ISIS. And I'll tell you, that's where it really, you started seeing, as we talk about the evolution of warfare, that is not just, evolution being there's introduction of things that you've seen in the past. And so as I'm watching the Kurds and ISIS, literally, dig trench lines 100 meters apart from each other with a, respective no man's zone in there. The use of maneuver warfare, which, was you take a pickup truck, slap a bunch of, or a dump truck and slap a bunch of, metal on it, because now that's the armor aspect. You start putting those vehicles together, you now have a maneuver force when you load, a bunch of ISIS in the back of it. And particularly in comparison to the previous, decade plus of how really combat had evolved in Iraq, Afghanistan, and we talk about urban combat and such. Those skills, you got to dig those skills back out when you start thinking about that type of warfare, and particularly on scale, which is now what you've got when you look at, in comparison to ISIS and the Kurds. On scale, you see the Ukrainians and the Russians. And when I say on scale, that's in a pretty compressed area when you think of the Donbass and that space, versus across a good portion of Europe. Now that's scale. And then everything that goes to support that from a logistics perspective, munitions, people, the ability to, where are you going to gain a tactical advantage to a strategic advantage and so forth. Mm-hmm. Probably a little more than what you wanted there.
No, I think it's perfect. I just, again, like, to me, it's sort of just an ongoing discussion, because I think that there's implications too, insofar as human performance is concerned, because again, I mean, this is so cheesy. People are going to kill me for saying this, but like, the war on terror almost seemed like a strength power endeavor. Whereas what we're seeing in the current battle space seems more of like a cognitive endeavor / more of an endurance endeavor. You mentioned long durations and stuck in place, having to think cognitively. A drone's come in, like, it just seems like a very different battle space. And I wonder what the second and third order effects might be, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. It's just interesting.
Yeah, well, I would tell you, I think that, I mean, as we talk about the wellness space, and specifically from a mental, behavioral, emotional perspective, I mean, different ways to I don't want to say, different ways to increase that capacity. All right, I mean, let's look at it through as we talk about physical lens, you got certain capabilities, but in the end, we're trying to increase capacity as we think about, cardio, strength, and so forth. And you all are the experts on this. I think you got to apply a similar framework or approach to the emotional, to the behavioral wellness aspect. I mean, it could be really, really hard. And and the thing is being sore from some physical activity, I mean, you can rebound a heck of a lot quicker than potentially the second, third order impacts of that emotional, mental, behavioral encounter that you have.
Mhm.
So I don't know if I'm going to be able to turn this into a clearly articulated question because 1,000 things are running through my brain right now.
Well, I'm not sure if I've actually articulated anything very clearly to you all for the
Listen,
past
so
30
far
minutes.
so good.
But the phrase you used that got me going is if you don't have reps on that, it's going to be bad if you get exposed to it for the first time in a combat environment. And a theme I've been reading on recently is things related to resilience because I struggle with some of the ways we approach resilience as an army recently. And like one of the particular ways is that I don't think resilience is developed in classrooms where you talk about resilience. I think resilience is developed by going through some hard things and realizing you can.
Right on.
I thought it was computer-based training.
I mean,
No?
we'll not go there yet.
Mike Klepper.
Oh, we love Clever.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
Yeah.
Mike Klepper, one of his taglines, do hard things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And if you do it, guess what? The more times you do it, it gets easier. And then you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna give you more hard things to do.
I got to give Clever a shout out because we had him on, and his Instagram, for folks that don't know, occasionally he posts a workout. I think it was 10 rounds of like 10 bench press at 225, 10 chin ups, and I was like, oh, I'll do that. I didn't get very far. So yeah, he does hard things. Absolutely.
Yeah. Call that old man strength. Okay.
I'll call it whatever he wants. That's badass. Sorry, Alex, I interrupted.
No, you're doing the fitness thing and I'm doing the nerdy thing. It's perfect.
There we go. Perfect.
The books that come to mind as I think about this that I looked at recently, and I was way overdue for reading both of these, but Coddling of the American Mind and then Anti-Fragile. And I think there's a potentially dangerous idea in terms of how some of these things are discussed, where like wellness is not just like being taken care of and taking care of yourself and like the whole self-care idea. Part of it is going through that hard stuff and the increased capacity for hard things that you get from it. I don't know if anybody's nerdy enough to read Anti-Fragile. It's pretty long and pretty dense, but the core concept there is that some systems are fragile. They need things to be predictable. And if they do unpredictable, chaotic things to them, they fall apart. And some systems, humans being one of West Point has figured out to a certain degree how to dose out stress in a way that accelerates growth. And I think that's like a hard conversation to have when you like West Point controls a large degree of people's lives for several years. And you don't always have that level of control in other places. So it's a pretty cool lab experiment on stress inoculation and how much to dose it out to get that growth.
Absolutely. And here's the thing, Alex, and that's why, I mean, this place is a 24/7 living, breathing, laboratory. I mean, it really is. I mean, in everything that we do, I mean, it's not just a classroom. I mean, the classroom's a laboratory. The competition field is a laboratory. The inside Arvin gym, that's a laboratory, is how I see it. In order to expose, our cadets and expose staff and faculty to things that maybe they wouldn't have been exposed to otherwise. And so when you get, we talk about it, you get those reps under your belt, it does become easier. Now, the expectation though is that it gets easier because you're getting better at it, not because you're avoiding it, ignoring it, or going and doing something else. It's easier because you're getting better at it. And then once, and by the way, I mean, the framework here, as you know, Alex, I mean, there's a lot of people that I'll say we've got a lot of sensors out there that can pick up on, hey, wait a second, something's going on there. By virtue of our tactical officers, the chain of command, instructors, coaches, staff and faculty. So if there's something going on with somebody, I mean, even though they may be dealing with it in their own way, I mean, if it's a parent, we will identify it, or we've got people in place to identify. And quite honestly, I mean, as we think about it, being a good teammate, your teammates, the people that know you best, should help you identify and say, hey, let's go get some help. I know someone, you need to talk to somebody, and then we work through that.
I'm liking the idea of emphasizing sensors to recognize when the stress being dosed out is more than somebody's ready for at the moment they're receiving it. It seems like this is a conversation we could do a better job of having out in the rest of the force and like out in American society in general, because I think there's this idea that we need to protect people from stress because they're fragile. And it's not that. You just need to monitor people to make sure they're in the range where they can adapt to it. And at the risk of getting ridiculously nerdy, the chart that always comes to mind for me is the graph of how hormesis works. Whether it's a stressor or a toxin or whatever it is, below a certain threshold, nothing happens. Above a certain threshold, you adapt to it. And then above a higher threshold, you experience toxicity or death or something like that.
Right.
And you're essentially just titrating that with physical, psychological, and academic stress all at once. And
yeah, and throw in the fact that you're an 18 to 24-year-old, and a lot of this stuff is the first time that you've been exposed to it, or that you're doing it. You're away from home. Whatever your respective support network was there, and you get here and maybe you're starting over again. But again, that comes back to the team aspect. Hey, you got to be a good teammate here. One, you got to be accountable for your own actions, but you got to help out your teammates also, both when it's positive, but also when it's like, hey, you got to take a look at yourself.
Since taking over as superintendent, what are you most proud of?
That's an awkward pause. Okay.
That's okay. We'll fill it with the Jeopardy music.
Yeah, I think that I'm one is that coming here, like the Army doesn't educate or train you to be the superintendent. Okay. My background isn't to be, the president of a college or university equivalent. All right. I'm pretty proud of the fact that, well, both my wife and I are graduates. Okay. We're from the same class. And so we've got some unique perspectives. Our son went here, so as a parent also, and that I'm a big believer in presence. And so cadets may think I'm in too many places. I don't necessarily think there's a lot of places that I'm not, that I think I probably should be at times. But I do believe presence matters. And particularly when we think about the population of cadets, this goes back to demonstrating what right looks like, role modeling, leading by example. And if you're not present, you're not doing that. And I would like to think that if I'm doing it, others are seeing it, and then they're latching on to that. Not because I think that that's what this place needs. It's just that's my approach to leadership, and that's how I've been for 30 plus years.
Mm-hmm. I guess as a follow-on for that, you mentioned obviously not the military didn't train you to take on this position. So what were some of the expectations you had coming into this role versus some of the realities that you faced? And I guess that could be for better or for worse, depending on which direction you want to go in.
Yeah. So Drew, just so you know, I was the commandant of cadets for 2 years here in 2017 and 2019. I hadn't been back to this place except for my reunion, in my 20th reunion, and then when our son came here to show up on our day, and that. The only reason I say that is that Alex is probably a gray hog. I wouldn't say that I was. I'm certainly one now. Someone that's really immersed in the academy.
A gray hog.
Yeah. He'll explain it to you when we're offline. Okay. But the fact is that that being the commandant for 2 years gave me some exposure to the academy that I didn't have otherwise. Now, having said that, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to what the superintendent worried about during those 2 years because I was the commandant doing my own different thing. And there are certainly days I wish I would have paid attention. What I felt coming back as the superintendent is to remind, we've got people that have been here a long time, but we're still the Army. I mean, we've got rotating faculty that comes in from the Army and goes back out to the Army. The Army expects us to meet the standards of the Army, and that's all of us. Whether it's a lieutenant general, brigadier general, colonels, lieutenant colonels, command sergeant majors, etc. Like, we are still in the Army, and I think by virtue of longevity in places, some folks can forget that. They can, they haven't PCS'd in 2 or 3 years. They haven't PCS'd in many years in some cases. And thus the connectivity to the Army and what we're sending our graduates out into, we can lose touch with that if you're not out there being exposed to it. Mm-hmm. And that's something that for us here, I mean, we've got to make sure that we understand that, because in the end, we gotta solve problems for the Army. Okay. We do this thing called Projects Day, which is in the April-May timeframe. And it's like capstone type stuff for the cadets. You know what? I mean, they're figuring out what their projects are going to be right now. And my charge is, if it's not oriented on solving a DOD or an Army problem, we shouldn't be doing it. We've got to be a resource for our Army and the Department of Defense, because we've got incredibly skilled, knowledgeable, talented people, not just cadets, but staff and faculty who can contribute to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to ask when we have you here. This is not directly related to being the superintendent, but you've served in and commanded a huge variety of types of organizations.
Yeah.
Like mechanized, light, conventional, special operations, done some cool stuff deep in special operations command and all that. And whenever topics like that come up, whenever we have somebody that's Ranger Regiment or SOF or whatever it is, the topic of what it takes to get selected and what it takes to be in that organization and what it is about that organization that achieves that high level of performance. So I'll ask you 2 questions related to it. On the human performance side, what did you learn that it required to get into those places and serve in those roles? And then taking that with you into your current role, what do you learn from those organizations that you help apply to cadets and the rest of the Army?
Yeah. Okay. So human performance wise, what I learned from it was, I'll put it, it's pretty simple. I mean, in particularly in the selection aspect, don't overtrain. Too many people, and I think Drew will appreciate this, ruck way too much. All right. They get more miles under their, on their legs, and that when you show up at the selection course, just by virtue of the environment, specifically the terrain and what you're asked to do, if you've got any type of injury, it just compounds. Like, it manifests in something that you get hurt. So the overtraining aspect, because, and this, I mean, people that have their sights set on going to an organization like that, and through that assessment and selection process, they're probably pretty high performing individuals. They're determined. They've probably got a pretty good fitness routine. They want to be part of something that is different, bigger than themselves. and they will do like anything from, they want to be in the best physical shape that they could possibly be in. And in order to get there, they don't necessarily they might not have the foundation that's required, but they also may not have the framework to do it the right way. And I'll tell you, I'll be the first one to, overtraining. I mean, I did selection twice. All right. The second time I did it, I did a lot of cycling on a station, on my bike, on a trainer, reading my Air Force CGSC material. I did a lot more of low impact compared to what I'd done previously when I was coming out of the Ranger Regiment.
We've got a guy helping us with injury prevention content, a physical therapist actually associated with SOF and things like that. And that's something he's been pushing us to push, is the conversation about like low impact alternatives to build endurance for people without the wear and things like that.
They don't listen though. They don't listen because their buddy who's been in selection did something. You're not rucking enough, man. You got to do some more.
Right. Now I will tell you, my belief is spend as little time underneath load as possible when you're in the course. Like, I mean, you got to move out, but the fact is that over days and weeks, the cumulative effect starts to take a toll. Okay. Hey, it was actually two questions. The second question was with regards to what have I what did I bring from 15 plus years or so in special operations back. I'll tell you what, it's pretty, make someone else tell you no. Like legitimately, like if we talk about innovation, we talk about persistence, we talk about determination. I mean, if you want to, as part of a high performing organization, I mean, other high performers elevate you. So keep building teams of high performers, and they will continue to build on each other. Given they got to be good teammates along the way. And I'm a big believer in that. And I say people all the time, they limit themselves is what I think it is. Being self-limiting, oh, I can't do that. Hey, do you think I don't know if I could do that. I'm like, why not? I mean, here's the thing. If you can't, you can't. But like, don't stop yourself from at least trying. So I'm a big believer in make someone else tell you no.
So I have to ask this. I was wondering about whether to ask this on air or not, but when you talk about people who just like build strong teams and make the people around them better, I want to ask you about, and I'm going to make this cheesy for him. I'm hoping he's listening. A time you spent working with somebody who inspires me. So Sean, big tires rolling Robertson.
Yeah.
Big tires.
I don't even know if General Gilland knows the origins of the big tires rolling part. Sean has many nicknames. He's a character. Everybody remembers him. I know when I first met Sean, he had not had a lot of exposure to West Point other than all of us dumb lieutenants that were in his bullet class and stuff. And he talked a lot of smack, as is his right, prior enlisted, not a service academy guy. But I know he fell in love with it when he got to West Point, did some awesome things while he was there. I'm just curious. I don't know what your selection criteria is for choosing an aide, but what stood out about Sean? Because it seems to tie into a lot of what you're saying about being a hard charger, make other people tell you no, build strong teams, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, typically my selection criteria for something like that is if someone says they want to be your aide, you're like, yeah, I don't want that person. I'm going to get somebody else.
You have this criteria for aides as we have for podcast guests.
like it's like, hey, do you want to be my aide? No, not really. I prefer to do this, and this. It's like, okay, you're exactly who I want to be the aide. Right?
And I have the power to make you my aide. So boom.
Yeah. Now with Sean, I mean, yeah, it was the position of the aide, but I mean, he's just an awesome teammate. I mean, he really is. And it doesn't matter who you are. I mean, he is inspirational. He's super jacked also, okay, which can be intimidating. He is incredibly intelligent. I mean, his thoughtfulness in so many different spaces to me was like, I'm like, damn, Sean. I mean, I want to hear more about that. And he could do that just in a very natural way. I mean, he's a person that can fit in literally anywhere. I'd call him a chameleon, okay? Because he really, I mean, he relates to people, he drives people, he inspires people, and he's an awesome teammate.
I don't know if the audience appreciates any of that or not, but I just have to put Sean on the spot. Sean might, and this is a tough one for me. You talked about not making somebody your aide because they want to be your aide. The only rule we have on this podcast so far is that we don't bring people on the podcast who ask to come on the podcast. And Sean, and I'm sorry to put this out there in public, Sean, but Sean has brought up the topic of coming on the podcast, but Sean might be the only person that I would make an exception to rule number 1 for, because I don't know what I would ask Sean on the podcast, but I know it would be a great conversation.
Oh, definitely. I think here's the question. Did he ask, or did he say, would you consider asking me?
No, I think it was a lot closer to him telling me to.
Okay.
All right. I think if he gets a signed memo from the superintendent of West Point allowing him to come on, I think we could probably make an exception.
Hey, just remember, you own your rules.
That's true. Rules are meant to be broken.
Jeez. Let me ask you a dumb civilian question as far as the academy is concerned, just because I seem to make a living doing these kinds of things when we have West Pointers on. What is something... I mean, the academy's been around for a long time. I think most people know the history of it. What in your
20 plus years, yes.
Right? In your opinion and in your position, what have you? What comes to mind as like the biggest thing that's changed in all that time? And then as a follow-on, like what's something? And I'm going to challenge you on this. What's something unique or interesting that has not changed, that has stayed the same? And I don't want like, oh, the culture. I want like something like interesting and quirky. I'll put you on the spot.
Okay, the interesting and quirky. Let me think about that.
Because I as you're thinking, I watched Pale Blue Eye, I think was the movie, right, Alex, that I was saying, and I was texting Alex while I was watching this.
Drew's been all about this.
Like, dude, the outfits are obnoxious, and he goes, "Well, the thing is, we still wear the same thing. The hats have changed a little bit." And it's like, so that's why that question came to mind. Also, I didn't know Edgar Allan Poe went there. That was a fun fact.
Yeah. Okay, that was about as accurate. Right there. Okay, Edgar Allan Poe. That was the accuracy of it.
He was there for like 10 days or something.
And man, that was a horrible movie.
Oh, like, come on.
Did you stay awake?
Yeah. I mean, the ending was, they jumped the shark a little bit at the ending, but I'm a sucker for what's his face? Christian Bale.
Yeah.
So, but
I still haven't watched it, so I can't comment on
You went to West Point. You're probably involved in all the murders.
I expected a lot more from that movie, quite honestly. And it didn't deliver. So, but I mean, we all have our different takes on that. Okay. So what has changed here over time? I think it's this commitment to service that I think has really changed because we talk about it. I know that, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, we probably talked about it in some way. 200 years ago, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, when I look back, a few decades in the last century when I was applying to come here, I don't remember anybody talking to me about service. And when I say service, I mean service to the nation and what that meant. And even as a cadet, I mean, we talked about it, but you're immersed in it now. And the commitment that our young people have, our cadets have, and everybody here. And I think, and again, I think it's similar at the Air Force Academy, Naval Academy, and so forth. I don't think it's something specific to the military academy, is this commitment to service and the discussions that are had about it so that everybody understands what's expected of them. I think that is a tremendous positive and a change that, like I said, I didn't experience that when I was here to the degree that we do it now. Quirkiness or quirky things that.
besides shitty movies.
haven't changed. I think that as we draw on legacy and traditions, and of course, traditions that mean something, you do something once around here, and you don't change the slide. It's now a tradition the next year type of thought. You got to be careful with that. But when we look back at the comparison of, and it's not just buildings or your dress. When I think about, I go back 100 years when MacArthur was the superintendent here, and he was really the first superintendent because he was brought in post World War One to run the academy, and his belief was, hey, we got to get our cadets out into the Army while they're cadets because they stayed here too much. And what they found out is when they went to World War One, they didn't know how to interact with our non-commissioned officers, lead formations in a manner that was consistent with what the Army required. So he instituted what I call the first version of cadet troop leading training, which is where a cadet goes out to an Army unit and spends 3 weeks out there in a lieutenant position. Okay. One, they're learning about the Army. Two, they're engaging with non-commissioned officers and soldiers within that unit. And they're finding out, hey, is this what I want to do from a branch perspective? But it's also, your leadership style might be a little bit different by virtue of the formation that you're in front of or exposed to. And so some little things there as we look across time in just the last 100 years, we've maintained that exposure. And some people, it's these little, I don't know, I'll call aspects of cadet life that aren't necessarily, replicated anywhere else that you kind of look back on and say, hey, I really enjoyed that. And I like doing that stuff. I think there's a whole lot of different experiences that people have here, because there are some individual experiences that are vastly different, but the core experiences are really, what form one's leadership experience here and their cadet experience. Probably not a very good answer to you on that one, but there's a lot of things with that.
All right. We are bumping up against the hour mark here. I have 2 questions for you. One might be longer. One is hopefully fast. There is a correct answer. For the first one, what have we not asked you about here that we should have? What is something you think people should hear that we didn't draw out here?
Well, I think I talked a little bit about, when we talk about leadership, I'm a big believer in positive leadership. So, I kind of got 3 taglines here, which is be positive, because who likes hanging out with negative people or cynical people? Do your best. You may not be the best, but do you do your best? And that goes to part of the team. Positivity can be infectious. So can negativity, but that takes you in the wrong direction. There's a lot of young men and women that come here. They were the best, and now they are amongst a large pool of the best, and clearly some rise to the top. Do you continue doing your best, though? And I think that matters. It matters not only here, but it matters in life. And then the third kind of tagline: be a good teammate, which I talked about earlier. I think those things, when we talk about the academy, we're also talking about life, though. The things that you're learning here are life lessons and applicable regardless of being in uniform or not.
The comments you made there have brought to mind a bonus question. So I said there were going to be 2, now there's going to be 3. The bonus question is, as I'm sure you're aware, the best cadets don't always make the best officers. In terms of the way you're graded aren't always the same things that lead to great performance as an officer. What do you look for that the grading system might miss to recognize somebody who's probably going to make an awesome officer, even if the ranking and stacking of cadets isn't detecting that necessarily?
Yeah. Grit.
Hmm.
I look at that. I look at, can you get knocked down, and what do you do about it? It's not about getting knocked down. It's, do you get back up, and how do you approach getting back up? Are you getting back in the fight, or are you like, I can't do this? And of course, they sound pretty simple. Like, of course, right? Well, there's a bunch of, across our nation, people haven't necessarily experienced failure. Our younger generation, particularly, and why is that? Because people like me, parents that maybe didn't allow that, or didn't create an environment where you failed and you had to do something about it. You had to get better. You had to learn from that and move past it. I think that those are hard work. Okay, I mean, just growing up in an environment where you got to get out there and bust your butt, for things that you want. And I'll use an example here. I mean, we talk about, as you think about admissions here, and you went through the process, Alex, hey, just because you got a really high ACT or SATs, you're the captain of whatever, your National Honor Society, you got a 4.7 on a 4.0 scale. There are people out there that, they got a 3.6. They're working a job or two to help their families out. They grew up in a rural area, and they're working on a farm, or they're traveling, 30 to 45 minutes to go to a school that's going to give them better opportunities for the future. All right. And they're paying for it. They're trying to pay for it themselves, or they're searching out scholarships. Like, those are attributes that matter to me. All right. You're seeking out the initiative to do that. Because those are all attributes that matter to success in life, is how I see it. Thus, the scores are not as, I would say they're important, but I think there's other aspects of life that I would value more when I think about success overall.
If the audience isn't picking it up, what he just described is measures of performance versus measures of effectiveness. It's easy to measure SAT scores, GPAs.
We planted that.
Number of volunteer hours, whatever. The things that are harder to measure that he just described there are the measures of effectiveness that we're really looking for.
Yeah.
But how do you capture those? I mean, because again, I think about this from a human performance perspective where we're chasing data. We talk a lot about Hammond's law on here, which of course means what gets measured gets managed, but what needs managing isn't always measurable. So as an extension of that, you just listed off a lot of intangibles.
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine that unless a cadet puts on his application, his or her application, hey, I drove 45 minutes to work every day to support my family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do you wade through the noise that is objective metrics and identify those folks that you think do deserve a chance?
Yeah, you got to ask them. It requires communication. I mean, like, literally. I mean, and how do you do that? I mean, you got to generate, you got to generate the environment or the forum, the venue to do that. And, and that's through nominating committees. That's through our, our field force that we have. It's these different aspects, and it's on, hey, what else do you want to tell me about yourself? Okay. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you, I'm biased. All right. I mean, I grew up on a farm in Western Illinois. Okay. I thought I was prepared to, go off to college. I found out when I got here, I was woefully unprepared to go off to college from an academic perspective. But I didn't have a whole lot to, turn around and go back to, some other institution. This is what I had. And so it's like, okay, you better figure it out pretty quick, in order to stay here. So also, when you look at success out in the Army, success, I would tell you, is, when you're leading organizations, how do you deal with people? How do you lead people? And and it's there's clearly not a template of leadership that you just put down on an organization, because, one leadership style, it may not be the best leadership style for a host of reasons, other people and such.
All right. My last one, and then I'll shut up. Drew might have one for you. Leg tuck or plank?
Oh, come on. I can't even believe you asked me that. Leg tuck.
There we go.
Of course.
Just had to make sure.
I mean, you know, I'm a leg tuck fan personally because I think I mean, I get more out of it from a full body perspective. Okay. And I will tell you, it makes me a hell of a lot sore than, the plank. So yeah, I'm a big believer in the leg tuck. Definitely. Hey, I got a question for you two though. All right. And that is, when we think about fitness across our nation, and I know what you all think because I've heard some other perspectives, some of your perspectives. How do we change the approach to fitness for young people around our nation? Like I would nominate you two to be the presidential. You remember? Well, you don't remember because you're too young. But at one point, Arnold Schwarzenegger
Oh, yeah.
was like
Mhm.
you remember this?
Oh, if you're talking about President's Council,
Yeah.
we've had 3 members of the council on
They
the
don't do
podcast.
anything, but we've had them on. I mean, no
Yeah.
offense. We like them.
We got to know each other because of the Soft American article by JFK.
Okay. Yeah.
Framed on
Yeah.
his wall. I got it framed on mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why aren't you two on the President's Fitness Council?
We're not famous enough.
I mean, we are aspiring to. That is my life goal.
We may create our own council.
But I think you're asking
It's $1 million
a question. You're asking a question that
question.
not only could be multiple entire episodes, has been multiple entire episodes of our podcast, but I will take a second just to kind of riff on it because I wonder if anything good will come out here. I think a piece of
This
it
is jazz. We're jazz now. We're doing jazz music.
right? I think a piece of it is we need like cultural leaders at the national and international level to have these conversations in terms of not why like fitness for its own sake is important, but why fitness. One of the biggest ones I worry about lately is how much physical activity declined over COVID, where we got comfortable sitting kids in front of computers for much longer periods of time, letting them outside less and less. And I don't think we have fully reckoned with the consequences of that yet. It doesn't show up in the data until a few years later. I know a bunch of school teachers and things like that are seeing it in a really tangible way. I'm hugely worried about it from that standpoint, but I think we've talked about it on here. Bloom's taxonomy of learning, different domains of learning. You have cognitive, psychomotor, and affective. And I think we're pretty good at cognitive, okay at psychomotor, and terrible at affective. Affective being how do you teach people to value something or make it part of their identity? I think that is a place where West Point has a competitive advantage, so it's relevant to this conversation. But how do we get people to make these things a priority? I've been super stoked lately. I'm pointing out a window you guys can't see, but there's been a huge increase in the last few weeks of kids playing outside unsupervised in my neighborhood. And I think that's the coolest thing in the world. And when I have conversations with people about it, they tell me it's because it's not as safe now as it was 50, 60 years ago to play outside. And that's objectively not true. It feels less safe because you hear all these terrible things in the news, but like statistically, it was much more dangerous to be outside unattended in the 60s than it is now. It just didn't feel so scary because you didn't have somebody screaming that at you on the news.
Right.
The bigger than fitness, but we got to have these conversations.
Yeah.
See, for me, it's more about I would come from a different direction, which would be to try and set policies in place to eliminate the friction points that start to slowly come between the human and the fitness. I mean, I always go to nutrition, and I think it just about how easy it is for a child in America who may not have access to much to become overweight and to become unhealthy and to become obese. And once you have all those risk factors in place, taking a step into a gym or joining a team or becoming active becomes more and more difficult because you've now put so many friction points between you and achieving that goal. Whereas if we make it just easier to be healthy, I would imagine that fitness, quote unquote, so to speak, would sort of logically follow. I think though I would echo a lot of what Alex says in terms of getting kids outside. I mean, I've got a 3.5-year-old, so I'm right in it. And then I don't know. I've always just this stuff, and we talked about this, I think, in a podcast we did recently. Some of the initiatives, and this isn't a knock on the president's fitness council or anything, but like they just seem like cheesy. Like they don't seem. It seems like a one-off. Like we're checking a box, we do some cool branding, and there's some kids outside playing flag football. But like, I don't know if that moves the cultural needle. as much as maybe, looking at like La Sierra High School, and there's a whole follow-on conversation about PE in school that could probably take
Yeah.
place. So I don't know, but I do, from my own little naive corner of the world, I do think that there's some pretty low-hanging policy fruit that we could change if we wanted to. It's just that the money is not there to
Yeah.
do it. It's more profitable to push something like big pharma, big medicine, big food, big whatever, and
Yeah.
that gets in the way of health, because healthy people, you can't make money off of healthy people. And maybe that sounds too political, but I think it's true.
Or could be interpreted as commercializing it. I mean,
Sure.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that across our nation, from a school's perspective, we ought to think about, take 5 minutes off of each class
Hmm.
and make it the PE class.
Yeah.
And so many. I mean, I'm not. I mean, when we think about, I mean, social sciences, math, reading, the history, sciences, biology, language that we have, AP classes and so forth, like, throughout the day in our classrooms, just take 5 minutes off each one and create an opportunity to go do something. And doing something doesn't mean that I'm walking around the track on my phone.
Hmm.
It means, hey, we're doing something. And you know this. I mean, you can create all kinds of really low cost physical events that are scalable based on people's experience and abilities and such, so that everybody is getting something from it.
Hmm.
But that takes, it takes, administrations, i.e. school administrations. I think it takes parents. It takes school boards to, I would say, demand it, because that's what's going to have to happen in order to change the respective, curriculum and such. I do think I think it is absolutely a national security issue as we look to what the future of warfare entails, and our ability to field formations to be able to, go execute in time of war.
I got a leading question related to that. As essentially the president of a university, and a university that does some uniquely hard things, do you ever get calls from parents worried that it's too hard?
I wouldn't say that I get calls, but yes, there are queries that occur with regards to, that's not, other institutions of higher learning don't do that.
Sure.
And then I like to remind those people that we're a unique institution of higher learning that is, accountable to our nation, and we better deliver for them. Therefore, we do some of these things this way, or we have requirements like graduation requirements that UNC doesn't have.
So we got to figure out how to pull that ethos out and plug it into public schools in America. Because every time you like peel a few layers back on what happened to physical education in our schools and some of these challenges and hard things, the answer is parents trying to make life good for their kids pressured the schools to get rid of it.
Yeah.
That's the consistent trend. So how do we get parents to understand that this process is valuable? And coming back to what we talked about at the top, that to make their kid resilient, the kid has to go through some things that they are not good at or find hard. And it's not the parent's job to protect them from all those things. And like, I'm a huge hypocrite at this point because I have no kids, and it's much easier said than done.
Alex.
But that I think is the root of this whole thing, is the conversation about, like, as a society, we need to decide that hard things are important sometimes.
Yeah. I also think, though, kids want to be challenged. I mean, I think it's human nature to want to be challenged,
as long as it's continually fostered. I worry
right.
about the Army too, that people join the military expecting to be challenged, and then somewhere along the road they stopped getting all the challenges thrown at them and got comfortable.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, hey, I mean, I'm in my mid 50s. I mean, I like being challenged. I mean, of course. I mean, that's part of the growth process, and we should always be learning and growing. And you know what? And believe me, I mean, I get challenged around here, and I wish I was 22 again, but I demonstrate very clearly that I am not 22. I am 56, and it comes out. but it doesn't mean you don't do it.
Do you guys think, and I'm curious because you brought up the national defense argument, and this could easily become its own conversation, but I'm curious your thoughts on this. Does the national defense argument as a cry for improving youth physical culture, whatever you want to call it, to me, that falls flat on a lot of people's ears who aren't intimately involved in the military because, for all intents and purposes, your average person in the street does not associate America with war. That's something that's far away. I think it made sense in kind of the Kennedy era, and sort of the World War II generation because it was like you could touch it, feel it, it was there. But nowadays, people just seem so far removed from war that you make that because everyone we've had on that we've asked that question to has said it's a national security, but
Yeah.
nobody seems to care, which might be a mean thing to say, but
Right. Well, no, I mean, Drew, I think so. The point being there is that that's how we think about it.
Mhm.
We look at it through the lens of national security or national defense, whereas in society does not.
Mhm.
Society looks at it through a whole bunch of different lenses that doesn't necessarily root itself in the security of our nation, particularly when we think about who our adversaries are out there, and we think about what and this goes to earlier in the conversation, something that I wanted to add. I mean, the fact is our adversaries, their societies are vastly different,
Mhm.
and but we're not, I would say collectively, we're not as educated or aware of how different our societies are. So just from an ethics perspective, when we think about the application of artificial intelligence, drones, et cetera, we look at it through a lens of the human in the decision-making loop, whereas our adversaries may not have a human in the decision loop.
Mhm.
And it's all based off of algorithm and whatever parameters are set respectively. I only go to that because, again, it comes back to society understanding the other cultures and our adversaries that are out there, and what it means to them if the United States is not the United States that we are today and have been clearly since the 1940s after World War II.
Mhm.
I've always thought it's all about messaging it the right way to the right audience. For a certain audience, it's the public health crisis, and we need people to be healthier if like medicine is going to be provided. For another audience, it's the youth mental health crisis. We can like food, nutrition, sleep, exercise can help with the mental health outcomes of our kids. Just figuring out the cool thing about getting people healthy and physically active and things like that is that it solves problems that span the political spectrum.
Yeah.
And you just got to find the issue that that person is worried about and help them understand how it can feed into a more positive outcome there.
Yeah. I, I agree with everything that you said. But it does come back to how do you institute that in the elementary and
Mm-hmm.
middle schools? Because if you don't have it there, it's really hard to carry any momentum into the high school and then post high school environments.
There's some really neat research. I bet West Point has their own piece of this whole thing. I found it because there's a researcher at Colorado State doing it about transition periods in life and certain variables during those transition periods having massive effects on long-term health outcomes. The classic transitions are high school to college, college to work, and then anytime you like move after that. And the number of feet between where you sleep and the nearest gym, number of feet between where you sleep and the nearest source of healthy food, things like that. Like those numbers have a powerful ability to predict your long-term health outcomes.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that. Yeah, definitely.
Now I'm thinking how far my garage is from where I'm sitting right now because it's right next to the refrigerator.
Well, that's a great point. So here's the thing, and Alex, you know this. I mean, I literally live
Mhm.
about 110 feet from, like, what some could argue is, say, the best fitness facility in the entire world, Arvin Gym. And I don't use it to 10 per heck, I probably don't use it to 5% of what I could or should for that matter. But the fact that it's right there, so at 5:30 in the morning when I head out the door, all I got to do is cross through the gate and I'm standing there with a couple hundred 18 to 24-year-olds that are hyped up and ready to go. And I tell you what, that gets me ready to go.
It's the largest collegiate-owned climbing wall in the country, at least as far as I'm aware. All walls bigger than that colleges use are privately owned.
Yeah, we just redid it this summer, in fact.
Ooh, guess I got to visit.
Are you the fittest superintendent West Point's ever had?
Probably.
I mean, certainly the only 600 because the ACFT just started, but still. But
yeah,
probably you think could you beat them all up? You think?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say. No, I don't know.
Ike's over his shoulder like you better.
I tell you what, here's the thing. Bob Caslin, who I was the comm for him for a year. All right. Even though he was definitively older than I am in the same position. Okay. But I go back, he's old man strength. I mean, and that guy's fit. He is super fit. He's 70 years old right now, and he can take most of the young people here, I think. So he would give me a tough. I would give him a run for his money. Let me put it that way.
That's fair. Before we let you go, I want to ask you this. You're 3 stars. You've been basically through all the ranks. Now, this is a little bit of a knock on Alex because Alex, I think when you were a first lieutenant or a second lieutenant, created a reading list. And I just am curious as to your opinion before we let you get out of here. At what rank is it appropriate to issue a reading list?
Let's be clear. I did not create a reading list. I provided a bunch of books that were available to help people earn time off,
which most people would call a reading list. So I just want to know, at what rank is it appropriate to publish a reading list?
I think it all depends on the demands of the formation. Okay. You got to know your audience.
Drew, I'm going to have to bring in some of my soldiers from when I was a platoon leader to defend me. I swear it wasn't that bad.
I don't have a reading list, but when people ask me, hey, what should I read? And, I think there's a couple of good ones when we think about, you talk about just grit and being able to get something done. I'm a message to Garcia. Okay. I mean, you're familiar with that.
Yep.
Alex. Drew, are you familiar with it?
Yeah. It's in my office.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, it's short, it's pretty easy, but it's like, hey, it's about life. I mean, hey, move out and you don't get a whole lot of guidance, instruction, but you know what? You got a mission. So go accomplish the mission and you figure out how you're going to accomplish it. That actually goes back to one of your earlier questions about, in SOF, hey, here's your mission. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. All right. You'll figure out how to do it and accomplish it. Mm-hmm. It's kind of what, as we think, don't tell me what to think, teach me how to think. And so I look at that. I think that reading lists are awesome, other than the fact that, I don't have enough time to actually go down any of those lists, or at least I don't. Well, it's not that I don't have enough time. I am not good at managing my time to be able to read some different things. Actually, I'm reading a book on Ike right now that was given to me, and specifically his role in, as the Supreme Allied Commander in World War II, and the personalities that he had to manage, and quite honestly, why he was put into that job versus George C. Marshall specifically. Pretty neat.
Well, we've kept you up too late. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on. You're the first guest that I think has asked us the question. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Hey, when you go back through, just make sure if I said anything that sounds really stupid, I mean, just let me know. Okay.
That'll all be edited out. That's what I'm here for.
Guys, welcome back to the end of another episode, the outro. Man, tell you what, talk about somebody who is in a very unique position and has a very illustrious career. Superintendent of West Point. What were your takeaways?
I mean, I don't know if this is a takeaway, observation, feeling. I don't know what it is. As a cadet, I would have been for sure terrified to like sit down and have a conversation with the superintendent. And I'm not totally sure I'm over that, right? Like I think like people know I'm still in the reserve. I'm a major. I think
That's so weird.
I think if I put on that outfit and like had to go talk to the soup, I'd be fucking scared. Like I'd be pretty stressed out. And it's weird how like when you have a podcast and a microphone, you like don't have to be scared about that stuff. But when you have like a uniform and boots, you do. I don't know.
Big fan of the show too. People would not have heard this because it was off air, but he recalled some episodes from back in the archives.
That's what's rattling me. That's what's still weird to me is that like
very accessible leader, which is always refreshing.
I'm still not sure how to process that like emotionally.
Yeah, and I'm going to put this in the outro in case he is listening. We did talk about maybe doing something with the soups of all the academies. I think that there's a lot of conversation to be had still about
Drew is speaking it into reality. He's manifesting the roundtable he wants to have.
Because I think these individuals provide an incredibly unique perspective on the thing we talked about at the end, which is the physical culture, the state of physical culture in the United States. Because again, like, and we hit on this a little bit, but you could have the conversation from a national defense perspective and active duty military and rolling away to war, and that's fine. But I think where they sit, and I'll say they because we're manifesting, but particularly him, you've got the sort of this teenage population that's coming effectively into college. And we see how turbulent that has been in kind of the civilian academic space. So it's a unique perspective, I think, to converse about it in the military academic space. So fascinating.
Man, that was cool. It's
like talking to your old principal.
It is like talking to your old principal.
It's your old school.
I think if people are listening to the outro, that means they got all the way through the episode. But I think hopefully we as hosts learned something from this one, because I think things got good when we thought the episode was going to end. Mm-hmm. And we stumbled into drawing out some really good conversation. And hopefully we can repeat that a little bit and learn a little bit from the tactical things that get people to share the most important lessons learned they have. Because some guests, like in this case, his bio is widely available publicly. We know what he talks about. You can go on YouTube and listen to him give speeches and things like that. So you think you have an idea of what they want to talk about, and you can make a plan and things like that. And I think it's ironic that, and viewers won't fully appreciate this, but Eisenhower was staring over his shoulder.
Oh yeah, I was going to mention that the painting of Eisenhower is over his shoulder, staring at it.
And my go-to Eisenhower quote is, "Plans are useless. Planning is indispensable." It's the actual planning process that's useful, not the plan you produce, because that's going to get thrown out the window immediately. And we kind of experienced that there, right? Like we had a whole plan for things to talk about, but it's always the unplanned stuff where the value comes from.
Agreed. So with that, stay tuned for next week, where hopefully we've implemented some of these lessons learned. And go. What do you say? Beat Navy? Go Army?
Yeah, beat Navy.
Beat Navy. But also get the superintendent on for a roundtable. See you next week.
Bye.
Hey, Alex, let's cover our ass real quick.
Oh, great idea, Drew. All right, guys. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Before you go, please rate and review the pod on the listening platform of your choice. You can also visit us on our website at www.mopsinmos.com. That's mops, the letter N, mos.com. You can check out the library of podcast episodes, our latest blog entries, any helpful resources, and also sign up for our newsletter.
Drew nailed it. Just to underline a couple of things, the podcast entries have in-depth show notes on the website. So if you missed anything or you want to read any of the research we talk about, it is all there. You can, at the bottom of the website, sign up with your email and receive future updates from us. The blog posts go a little bit more in-depth in kind of written form on a couple of topics we get questions about all the time. But most importantly, I just want to ask all you guys, our best way the word gets out is absolutely word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell the people you work with, anybody you think would find it useful. Thanks for spreading the word.
If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot us an email at either Drew or Alex at mopsandmos.com.
Or there's a contact form on the website.